There are people throughout the world that have interesting stories to tell. Stories of heroism, acts of kindness, near-death experiences, successes, and failures. You usually hear of these stories from people that live in another state or country. But what about the stories from within your own community? Everyone has a story to tell. And by everyone, we mean your neighbor, your coworker, the person behind you at church, people you interact with on a daily basis, or maybe even you.
Welcome to the DTB Podcast, presented by the Bless Your Heart Nonprofit Corporation. I'm Brennan Matherne, and I'll be your host as we speak to some of the most interesting people on Bayou Lafourche. Living on the Bayou means we are routinely faced with obstacles. Time and time again, we prove that Cajuns can overcome any obstacle they are faced with. Today we are sitting with Lauren Lapeyrouse Guidry, a local daughter, wife, and mother from the Thibodaux area who has overcome living with cystic fibrosis, a double lung transplant, and infertility. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, like we do every time when we get started here, we'd like to know who's your mom and dad. So tell us about your family, where you're from, and where you grew up.
Yes, so I was born in Thibodaux. My parents are James and Michelle Lapeyrouse. They currently live in Schriever. We moved to that area when I was about to start high school. Went to, normal Thibodaux Catholic High School, went to E.D. White. Graduated in 2007, yes, and then went on to Nichols State. And I graduated from Nichols in 2012 with my bachelor's degree in education, and married my husband 2013, and we've been living in Thibodaux ever since.
And you mentioned, we were talking before, you graduated from Nichols, and then you actually had a teaching job. You were teaching locally as well?
Correct. So I ended up landing my dream job when I graduated from college. I know that doesn't happen often, especially for teachers. They tend to get, they get what they can get, but I ended up getting my dream job at Race and Lower. It was kindergarten classroom. I was working with some of the best of the best. I had great colleagues, a wonderful principal. I was working with really closely with my aunt, and that was really exciting for me. And I think that those 5 years that I spent in the classroom there were probably some of the best 5 years that I had. It was just a tremendous job.
So that's a good segue into talking about one of the subjects we're here to talk about today. So for our listeners who are not familiar, can you tell us what cystic fibrosis is?
Sure. Cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease. I was diagnosed when I was 18 months old, and I was really sick when I was 18 months old, and it kind of, prompted the doctors to do more tests, and eventually they would discover that I had cystic fibrosis. Once they found out that I had cystic fibrosis, they kind of were able to, get everything right, get my nutrition up. I was able to put weight on, and they were able to treat the the root causes. I really didn't have a lot of trouble until, later, a little bit later in life. I was about 13 before I was put in for what they call a tune-up, like a car. Basically what that was is they, would go to the hospital for 2 weeks. They'd, give me a bunch of antibiotics, pump me full of calories, get me back going, and then we'd go home. As I got older, they started doing them at home. I was able to go in the hospital only for a few days and then go home for the rest of it, which was really easy and really, better for me because I was in school and, I didn't have time to sit in the hospital for 2 weeks.
So I understand you had advanced cystic fibrosis. Talk about what that means and how was life living with that?
Sure. So probably when I hit my early 20s, I was finishing up college. I started noticing things that I hadn't really noticed before. Shortness of breath, just really tired, loss of weight loss. And I've done my research on it. As I grew older, I started researching things like how long do people with cystic fibrosis live? What are the steps to take when you have advanced stage cystic fibrosis? So I knew that there was going to be a point in life where it was going to get to the point where we had to do something, whether it would be transplant, which is something I really didn't want ever at first. But So it wasn't until I was in like my early 20s I really started to notice some things like I said, the shortness of breath. I remember there was one instance I had gone to Walmart, and I was in Walmart and I was like pushing my cart and I was just so out of breath. Like I could not catch my breath. And when I got into the car, you know, unloaded all the groceries, and I just got into the car and I like put my head on my steering wheel, and I couldn't breathe. I was just sitting in there and I was like taking these big deep breaths, trying to like catch my breath and slow my heart rate down, because I could just feel it was like, you know, beating out of my chest. I think that was like the first time that I thought, you know, this is bad. We reached a point of we need something else. We need to do something. So it was at that point that I, you know, they had put me on oxygen at home, which I was using it at night only at first, just to help me sleep, because they were worried about, you know, your oxygen level saturations drop when you sleep. Everybody's does, but people with cystic fibrosis, it's a little bit, you have to monitor it. So it started out like that, oxygen at night. Then it kind of just got worse. You know, I'd go to school and teach all day, and then I'd come home and I would like hook up to the oxygen tank all night long, because it took me that long to like recover from being at school all day and not being able to really take, you know, deep breaths. So that kind of went on for a while, and I would have like, you know, spurts of like feeling good, and then it would just kind of revert back to the constant coughing, the constant, you know, just feeling winded all day. And so right before the transplant, it was like spring break time. I remember I was just feeling so terrible. Seth was working, my husband Seth, and he was working, and I was home for spring break, or for Mardi Gras. And I remember like sitting in my living room and like thinking about like, you're not gonna be able to live much longer like this. You know, I remember and I remember thinking like, do I go play my funeral? Do I go? Because I had reached to the point of like where the morbid thoughts were not morbid to me anymore. They were real, you know. And I thought, maybe I should do that. Maybe I should go and like set it all up, so that way, like, if it does happen, you know, if I do succumb to this illness, like my parents and my husband don't have to like handle that. And I remember like thinking that during the day, and then like Seth came home, and I remember being like, that was like something really, really deep to have to think about today. And I remember like I didn't tell him about it. I didn't really tell anybody about that until after the transplant. But that was the moment of like, I knew that something was coming, like something was going to happen soon. And so that was like Mardi Gras time. And then spring break rolled around, and Seth and I actually went to Disney World like 2 months before the transplant. I had a scooter. I was rolling around on a scooter, because I remember, you know, we had a discussion like, I knew I wasn't gonna be able to walk at all. Like, I'm just, you know, I'm not silly. So we had a scooter. We had a really great time. We came back, and I want to say we were only home for a few days, and I was in the hospital again, just, you know, going on the trip, you know, just wore myself out. And so that was around spring break, and then we were kind of entering into the end of school area time frame, and that's like when it really got real.
So all of this happening while you're teaching, at the time, I know you're sharing with everybody now, but at the time, I mean, I'm sure that you had shared with at least some friends and family. You're teaching kindergarten, and that must have been a task in and of itself. But did the other faculty members know what you were going through? Did they have some kind of idea or clue? So you're, like you said, you're teaching them today, going home and being on oxygen at night. Did they have any idea of what you were going through?
No, I spent a lot of time pre-transplant kind of trying to, like, I don't want to say pretend it didn't exist, because it's obviously not possible, but I tried to kind of separate my work life and my health life. Like, other than my husband, who lives with me, you know, 24/7, and my parents pretty much, there weren't a lot of people that were really, you know, aware of how sick I was. I think cystic fibrosis is a silent and kind of like an invisible illness. Unless you really know people, it's easy to just look at people with cystic fibrosis and be like, oh, that's just a thin person. Oh, that's just, you know, but you know, I was really sick. And so it was just kind of a brave face during the day and then a recharge at night.
So ultimately, you keep talking about before your transplant. So obviously you did get a transplant. So tell us about that story, how that all came to happen, and how that went down.
Sure. So it was the week of kindergarten graduation, and I was busy, planning and practicing
Sure.
with our students. And it was a Wednesday, and I just was like not feeling like myself. I didn't feel good. I was felt like kind of worn down, but I figured, it's just the end of the year stuff. Well, my mom's youngest sister was having a baby that day, and I wanted to go see the baby at the hospital, but I wanted to make sure that I wasn't, sick. I had had a few kids in my class with a late case of the flu, and so I just wanted to be sure. And I went to the doctor just thinking, no, it's probably just like sinus infection or whatever. Well, I got tested. The doctor comes in and she says, "You have the flu," and I was like, no, I just kept thinking like kindergarten graduation. So I had to make the phone call to my principal and tell her like, I'm so sorry, but I can't, I won't be able to be there, and I couldn't go see the baby. So I ended up being home. So that was a Wednesday. I was home Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and my parents were like super concerned. Seth was actually out of town. And they were really concerned about me because I was on oxygen. I had the flu. They could tell I just was not, feeling good. And so my dad ended up coming to stay with me a day or two, and my mom came one day, and then Seth came home on Friday. Well, he said Friday is kind of like the last day that I really have, a vivid memory of the day. Saturday, Seth said, I acted like I was feeling better. I was kind of moving around more. But then Sunday morning, I woke up and I told Seth, I feel like I'm dying. We need to go to the hospital. And that's not something I had ever said to him like that, and especially in a serious way. And so he knew something was up. So I remember we weren't fighting, but we were trying to figure out how to get my oxygen machine in the car because my oxygen tanks were empty. So we couldn't bring the portable one. We had to get the one that you plug into the wall. Well, I was like, just plug it into the car. The car has a little plug-in thing. Seth was trying to explain to me that's not going to work. That's too big of a machine. And I was like, so we ended up just leaving it at home, and we went all the way to Tulane because that's where I was seeing doctors. So by the time we got to Tulane, when they took my stats at the hospital, my oxygen saturation was in the 70s. So the team at Tulane was starting to freak out because it's super low. They put me in, they admitted me into the ER. They called my doctor. They tried to put the high flow oxygen. That wasn't doing anything. So they guesstimate that my lung function at that time was about 12%, which not everybody's lung function is 100%, but it's definitely not 12. So between Sunday and Monday, that was a really crazy night. I don't remember any of this. It was crazy because, I knew, and I think I knew that the transplant was coming, but I think I didn't realize it was going to be like this. So they ended up having to intubate me. Well, before they intubated me, my doctor was comes in the room and he's like, look, you get intubated and we put you on the transplant list, or you don't leave the hospital. So obviously, I said, okay, well, that's what I want to do. So they did. They intubated me, and then they transferred me to Ochsner because Ochsner is where the transplant was happening. So I went that whole week at Ochsner, just going through tests. They literally test you for everything before they'll give you new organs. Going through insurance, going through, there's all kind of responsibilities on the patient and on the family and things like that they have to go through. So that was happening. Seth caught the shingles one day in the hospital, which was insane because, we're just he was, my transplant doctor was like, you probably caught the shingles because you're stressed. And Seth's like, I'm not stressed out. My doctor was like, what? Your wife's in the hospital. She's about to get new organs and you're not stressed out? He was like, no, I'm not. I was like, okay. So he ended up having to be sent home. So this is about Memorial Day weekend of 2016. The Friday, Seth was home. My transplant doctor came in and he said, okay, it's Memorial Day weekend. I'll see you before the end of the weekend with some lungs. And my mom was there with me, and she was like, what do you mean? And he was like, it's Memorial Day weekend. A lot of things happen. Sure enough, he was right. Monday morning, knocking at the door of the hospital room, and he comes in and tells my mom, he's like, I think we have lungs. And they use the word think and maybe because it can go all the way up until like surgery time before they say, no, those lungs are not going to work. But he seemed really confident in the lungs that that they had. So they started prepping me. They called Seth. They're like, you can come back to see her, and so they prepped me all day Monday, and then they took me into surgery Monday night. About 10, between 9 and 10 p.m. My whole family was like full on in the waiting area at Ochsner. I mean, and they're so loud. So I remember like Seth telling me after, he's like, me and your dad and your dad's friend had to like go find places to hide because they were just, they were loud and they were trying not to be sad. So they were like joking around everything. And then delirium sets in, everybody's laughing and cackling, So the surgery lasted all night. I'd consider my transplant date on the 31st because that's when the lungs were actually like placed inside my chest. And so surgery ended, I want to say about 5 a.m. And then they were able to see me a little bit later that morning. And right after the surgery, the doctor said they look great. Those were the lungs. Those were it. And so I was, all this going back, like I don't remember any of this because I was intubated and they were, I had the sedation medication was like crazy. And so the only thing I remember a few instances of like seeing people. Like I had a friend and she came and I remember she was such a hot mess. She was crying and she was like wiping all her tears. And I was like, I remember being like awake and like trying to tell her to stop, like waving my hands, like stop, it's okay. And she, I remember like my principal had come see me and I remember her, just being there. I don't know. It was just, things that I remember, like little things. But the next big thing that I remember was I woke up and I was in a hospital room and I looked around and it was just me. And I remember being like, by myself? That never happens. And then I saw my mom sitting over there and I kind of like coughed or something, like I did, like like I cleared my throat. She whipped around so fast and I was like, what happened? Like, what are we doing here? And she gave me this look of, you don't know what we're doing here? And I said, yeah, like, why are we in the hospital? And she had to like take a minute. And I remember her saying like, you got new lungs. I was like, what? No, I don't. I have old lungs. Listen. And I tried to like cough and it was not the cough that I had before. It was not the CF cough.
So obviously, right at the beginning, you obviously had some struggles and there had to be some time to recuperate. Mm-hmm. Now that all that time has passed, how can you talk about life post-transplant? We've heard stories from people over the years from all over the world about, either success stories or struggles after transplant. So how's it been for you?
Sure. So I think there's often a misconception about when cystic fibrosis patients have a lung transplant, it's not a cure by any means. And I think that like some people, just think, oh, cystic fibrosis affects all areas of the body, your digestive system, your sinuses, just a lot. And so the lung transplant didn't fix any of that. Like I still have to see the ENT all the time. I still have to take, the pancreatic enzymes to help my food digest. What it did is the new lungs will not be infected with CF, which is amazing because that's, what causes so many issues. So life post-transplant, it was just for somebody living with a cough constantly for 25 years, it was amazing to be able to like just talk and not get winded or, to walk around and not get winded or, and not have this like nasty, like junky cough all the time. And so that was like the biggest thing that was, that I took away from it. And it just gave me like a whole new lease on life. You just think about like, a patient with cystic fibrosis is just there's always something, there's always something. And it was just nice, not always having, the worry and the fear initially. I mean, sure, now, there's a lot of things to worry about now, but, it's definitely not something I would trade. I would do it. I would do it again in a heartbeat if I had to, just because it totally opened up a whole new world for me and my husband.
Well, you mentioned all the stuff to worry about now. So when the news like last year of COVID-19 comes out and the nature of the illness, what's your reaction as someone living with CF, and what's your thought process about what happens if I get this?
So I was terrified, obviously, because nobody, seeing what we were seeing on the news was just, it was awful. I had a sense of peace about it, though, I'll be honest, because I felt all of these things, like the transplant and the amount of time that I spent on the list, and all these things, they happened for a reason. I do believe that, like, if God leads me to it, then he'll get me through it. And I kind of had to take that mindset about COVID, because I couldn't let myself get caught up in, like, the what ifs and I'm thankful that, I work for Nichols, and they were very understanding about, working from home, keeping us safe, and all of the precautions that they were taking. We spent a lot of time at home. We spent a lot of time just, not interacting with people, because, you got to protect yourself. So I think that's kind of my stance on it.
Wow. So if you, looking back at the transplant, obviously you're here because someone else unfortunately passed away. So with that family, if you could say anything to the donor's family, what would you say?
Thank you. I penned this long letter, explaining, why, I needed it, and, all the things that I wanted to do with them, and I think that I think about that person daily, because I get up every day, and I wake up and I kiss my husband, and I eat breakfast with my kid, and I get to go to a job that I love, and I'm able to continue my education, all because of this person. And so that's, I don't know if they read the letter. I don't know if the donor's family have read it. I hope they did. I hope that they read it, and I'm okay with no response. I get that some people just, it's just not what they want to, they don't want to respond, and that's okay. But I wanted them to know that the lungs are not going to waste. Like they weren't just given to somebody who's going to take them for granted. Like I don't take them for granted at all. And so, that's why I do what I do. That's why I go to work. That's why I'm back in school. That's why I'm, raising my son the way we're raising him, because I want them to know that these lungs were meant for something bigger.
So you mentioned you have a son, and that brings us to our next topic. So spoiler alert, this has a good ending, but let's talk about, while you're battling all this, even before your transplant, you got some other news from your doctor as you and Seth are starting your marriage.
Right. So, kids were always in the plan for Seth and I, although in the back of, I think, both of our minds, we knew that it would be a little more complicated than just like a normal, pregnancy. And so right after we got married, they said, if you want to have a baby, now's the time to do it. So we're like, okay. So, we tried for a few months, nothing's really happening. So we end up getting referred to a high-risk fertility doctor. Because of my condition, it would have been a high risk. Well, we saw the high-risk fertility doctor for about a year. And then throughout that year, like, I just got worse, like sicker and sicker. My lung function kept going down. Just was not a good overall situation for me. And my CF doctor, kind of at the end of that year, was like, look, I really don't think it's a good idea. He was like, I think it's going to take too much on your body. It's going to be too much on your body. It's going to really drag you down. You're going to struggle with having a successful pregnancy and being able to carry it full term. Well, I'm stubborn, and I didn't really listen. So I kept going to the fertility doctor. Well, at the time, the doctor was ready to move on to actual treatments. So whether it be, whatever it was. And so, but they needed approval from the CF doctor because they're not going to, he wouldn't give it. And I was just devastated. I mean, I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I want to have a baby. I want to be a mom. And, Seth is like, he's definitely the level-headed one in our relationship. He's like, Lauren, like, I want you here. He's like, yeah, a baby would be great. I would love to have a family with you, but I want you to be a part of it. And that really hit me. And I was like, yeah, okay, I get it. I get that. So a transplant happens, and then it's kind of like nobody really at first wanted to talk about pregnancy. And finally, they were like, in order for you to get pregnant, or in order for you to carry a baby, we'd have to take you completely off of all your anti-rejection medication for 9 months. If you get pregnant right away, like and then like you're putting yourself at risk and your baby at risk for 9 months because your lungs, you can go into rejection, you can get, the risk was entirely too high. And so, and I knew that. And at this point, you go through something like when you go through a transplant and your life is saved by something like that, I had to like accept it. I was like, okay, I get it. I get that. So we explored some other options. We, talked about a surrogate. We talked about, Louisiana has some crazy surrogate laws. So that really wasn't an option for us. And then one day I was scrolling through Facebook and I was part of this infertility group around the area, and this there was this post, and it said, baby boy due in April, birth parents looking for adoptive parents, and then it had like a lawyer's name and a lawyer's phone number. This was in January when I saw this post. So I like screen capped it and I sent it to Seth, and I was like, is this how people are like adopting babies now? And Seth and I had talked about adoption, but not like enough. But his response back to me was, I'm ready when you are. And I remember I was at work and I was like, what did he just say? And I was like, just like floored, because I was like, that was not what I was expecting you to say. I was expecting you to tell me to be quiet and like, ignore it. So I picked up the phone and I called, and, they gave me all the information about it. It was this couple who, he has kids, she had kids, they had kids together, and they knew they could not have another one. They just were not in a place to be able to, love and support another baby. And so when the baby was due in April, so this is January, so it's like, so we talked to him. I went home and I looked at Seth. I was like, we gotta have a talk. Like, we have to talk about this because this is big. This is like life changing. And he was like, I think we should do it. And I was just, so we spent like 2 days working on our adoption portfolio, and we sent it to the lawyer, and he presented it to the couple, and they wanted to meet us. So this was like January 2018, and like they had this massive freeze. So like the first meeting that we set up, we couldn't do because it was frozen everywhere. So we had to reschedule it, and we finally met with them, and it was like, I don't know, it was just such an interesting, immediate connection. Like his birth mom and I could be friends, like, outside of that whole situation. Like I could have been friends with her, and they were just honest. They were just like, this is just too much for us. And so we like finishing up this conversation with them, and we're kind of looking around like it's like kind of awkward at the end because we really don't know what to do or what to say yet. And so the little the lady, the adoption liaison, was there, and she was like, all right, well, we'll be in contact. We're gonna let his birth parents make a decision. And his Sutton's birth mom was like, oh, I know what I want to do. And I was like, what? I was like freaking out. And then she's like, I want y'all to adopt this baby. This is y'all baby. And I remember like Seth and I just looking at each other, and I was like, and I was like puddle of tears, and Seth was crying, and we were just like, are you sure? And she's like, yes, this is y'all baby. I just feel like this is y'all's. And gosh, it just like was like fast track from there. Sutton was actually born a month early, so he was born in March. So we had 2 months to get everything together. But just like the transplant, that was a whirlwind. This was a whirlwind, just kind of how we do stuff, I guess, in our house. But it's it was great. The whole process was amazing. I have nothing bad to say about his birth parents, and I think that's the way I hoped it would be, you know? Like, I don't want Sutton to ever, I want him to know, you know, like, your birth mom loved you a lot. She loved you so much that she wanted, you know, Dad and I to raise you. And so, and, you know, and I think that's the most important thing. And he's such a great kid. He's the absolute best. And so it's just been a really great, process. And I think that all the struggles and all the hurdles that we hit along the way are kind of, you know, we're making up for it now.
That's just truly an amazing story, and really that answers the question. You can truly find anything on Facebook.
It's so funny because we actually, when we got married, I knew the priest, but I messaged him on Facebook to see if he would marry us, and so it was like kind of like a joke, like, Lauren will find anything on Facebook.
You're the go-to person now.
Yeah.
So Lauren, again, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story with us today. And hopefully for anyone who has friends and family members who are suffering with some of these issues, that this can kind of shed some light on it and at least we've heard one person's story and your struggle with it. But now comes the really hard part. We have some rapid fire questions for you, like we do for every guest. Okay. You can give us a one-word answer or expand on your answer. If you feel you need to explain, it's completely up to you. You ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
All right. What's your go-to order at a Down the Bayou restaurant?
Anything with rice. I like stew. I like gumbo. I don't eat just anybody's jambalaya, but a stew or a gumbo is usually my go-to.
And so that's where the expression "cook some rice" comes from.
Cook some rice, babe.
Pretty much,
that's what we say all the time at our house.
We can cook anything with it. Okay, so potato salad. Do you like it in the gumbo or on the side?
On the side.
Okay. Jambalaya, red or brown?
Red.
Really? Okay.
Yes. So I have Sutton's godmother. She makes the best shrimp jambalaya, and it's red. And that's kind of like the standard of what I hold all the other jambalayas to. So
I don't think I had brown jambalaya until I was well into my teens.
Really?
I grew up only eating red. What's your favorite Cajun French word or phrase and its meaning?
I don't really know a whole lot. I mean, tête d'oeil is like the go-to, right? Hard head. I feel like that describes a lot of people in my life, like myself. I've heard it a few times.
All right, this is an easier one. Favorite snowball flavor?
Wedding cake with condensed milk.
Good choice. All right, so here's the final one. This is the most important.
Okay.
When a boat is passing and you're in a car, is the bridge open or closed?
It's open. No, it's closed because... I don't know. I don't like this question. Next.
That's a good answer. There we go. All right, Lauren. Well, thank you. That'll do it for this episode of the DTB Podcast. Thanks to our guest, Lauren Lapeyrouse Guidry. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You can subscribe to the DTB Podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at the DTB Podcast. You can also follow Bless Your Heart Nonprofit on Facebook or on Twitter at BYH Nonprofit. You can donate to Bless Your Heart on Venmo at Bless Your Heart Nonprofit and on PayPal at blessyourheartnonprofit@gmail.com. That'll wrap it up for us on the DTB Podcast. Be sure to hit that subscribe button for our next episode. Until then, this is Brennan Matherne. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.